everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar talking all about navigating support systems after experiencing harm. My name is Amanda Bule. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Wellness Resource Center.
And I'm Haley. I am also using she, her pronouns, and I am the Interpersonal Violence Prevention Program Coordinator for the Wellness Resource Center.
So we're just going to get started here. Talking a little bit about our office. So if you're not familiar with our office, we're the Wellness Resource Center on campus. We're considered Temple's health education office. So people will go to us to learn about different well-being topics, including mental health and well-being, alcohol and other drugs education, interpersonal violence prevention, and sexual health. We also give out free safer sex supplies in our office to all Temple students. All you have to do is stop by with your TUID number. And we also have really great social media content. So feel free to follow us at Be Well To You. Not only is it a great way to stay in touch with upcoming events and things we have going on, but we have some really great educational well-being content across all of our content areas. So I recommend that. In this conversation, we're going to be talking about harm people may have experienced. So definitely take care of yourself however you need. Since this is a recording, that's nice. You can stay in the comfort of your home or some other place you feel comfortable. So feel free to pause if needed, have, a blanket, snacks, whatever you need. And I'll also note that the Wellness Resource Center is a confidential office on campus. So what that means is if you disclose anything to, professional staff at the Wellness Resource Center, as long as it does not involve harm to yourself or to another person, we would not have to make a formal report. So we are a confidential resource. We're here to support you and make sure that you have space to thrive. So getting into a little bit of what self-advocacy is. So today we're going to talk all about self-advocacy during a SANE exam, a sexual assault nurse exam. And we'll get into what that is in a little bit, but we first want to start with self-advocacy as a general term to begin with. So it's a practice of representing yourself and helping others understand how to best support you. And it's a really great way to kind of tune into your own needs, try to understand what you need, but then also feel safe and comfortable in advocating for yourself and expressing whatever those needs are to another person or maybe a medical provider, maybe a friend or someone you're in a romantic relationship with. And knowing yourself really does start with something like a feelings wheel. And you can kind of attune to, okay, I'm feeling, really tight in my chest. Maybe that's anxiety. Maybe it's anger. So knowing what each maybe sensation in your body feels like, attributing that to some kind of emotion. And then thinking about what are my needs in this moment? So maybe if you're walking through, the feelings wheel, thinking about self-advocacy, you can start with, I don't know how to make a formal report, and the thought of it is really making me anxious. So that's step one, and that's just understanding your needs, thinking about, I'm not sure how to do this, and pursuing it doesn't really feel comfortable. I don't really know what to do next. Talking to a patient navigator or support person could be helpful for outlining the next steps so I can understand what to expect. That's maybe understanding the support you might need, knowing where to seek out help. And then finally, I don't know if I want to report, but I'd like to know what would go into it. Can you walk me through what to expect? So then communicating those needs clearly to others. So it's always okay to struggle with self-advocacy just because, it's an ongoing practice that we all are working on in our lives. But just knowing that, giving yourself grace and knowing that if you are able to self-advocate, that could result in, more desirable outcomes, perhaps for yourself, more comfortable outcomes.
So now let's get into actually talking about what a SANE exam or a sexual assault nurse exam is and kind of what we can expect if we seek out this kind of support. So after an instance of sexual assault, someone can seek this exam to determine if they have any physical injuries, to collect any evidence left behind that by the person that harmed them, and just generally get checked in with by a healthcare provider. So a SANE is a sexual assault nurse examiner. This is a nurse who's been specially trained to conduct these exams on patients. Again, they allow the clinician to do a comprehensive exam of the patient, check for any injuries that might need treatment. They can also take swabs and other samples that can be preserved as evidence should that person want to maybe press charges against the person who harmed them. Additionally, these exams include getting medication to prevent pregnancy if that's applicable to the survivor that's seeking the treatment. It can also involve evaluating and treating any possible sexually transmitted infections and also providing, the patient with follow-up information about any additional care they might want or need and the resources that are, at their disposal for support after this experience. There's a few tips regarding these exams that can be helpful to know and keep in mind should we need an exam or someone in our lives maybe want to have an exam done. It is best if the exam can be done within the first 72 hours of that experience of harm. It can be done later, so that's not to discourage someone who's at that 80-hour mark from seeking that assistance, but that's just the recommended guidelines. It's also recommended, if possible, that the person not shower or wash themselves or wash their clothes prior to the exam. That is for the purpose of evidence collection. But obviously, we know that after a traumatic experience, we might want to, wash off. We might want to at least change out of those clothes. That's fine. An exam can still be conducted. If someone feels the need to change out of their clothes just so that they can feel comfortable and safe, they can, put those clothes in a paper bag that preserves them pretty well and bring them with them to the exam rather than feeling the need to keep them on until they get to a center. And these exams can typically be conducted in most hospitals, but we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So, how do we get an exam? Where can we access these supportive services? That's kind of the first step in, you know, this is an act of self-advocacy to seek out this exam if someone wants to. So, how do we take that first step to doing it? A SANE exam, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a forensic exam, can be performed at a hospital or a local rape crisis center. For our Philadelphia-based students, this would be what we call PSARC for short, Philadelphia Sexual Assault Response Center. In Philly, a hospital will usually transfer someone here. This is located on Huntington Park Avenue. It's co-located with Philly PD's Special Victims Unit. That's important to know if you've never seen the building before, but you do not need to report to the police in order to receive an exam there. They're simply in that same building lot. The center is open all day, every day, and in line with Pennsylvania statutes and procedures, the exam and any medications that are given during that exam are free of cost. These laws are applicable in other states as well, but if you're not located in PA, it's always good to check in on what your local regulations are and where your local rape crisis center is. If someone needs help getting to PSARC for an exam, there are people who can help. WAR, which is the Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence, will get you there. So you can call WAR's hotline at any time, and they will call and pay for an Uber or Lyft ride for you to get to and from PSARC. A police officer, can also transport someone if they choose to call the police. There's a lot of reasons why someone may not feel comfortable being transported by an officer, so that's by no means the only way, but it is an option if someone feels comfortable with that. So then we've talked a little bit about law enforcement and reporting, right? We've mentioned the police, but it's important to know some things about that process, even if someone doesn't choose to go through with it, just so you can make an informed decision. So someone who has experienced an assault and even who gets a SANE exam may also want to report to the police, but they're not required to. But it is important to remember that this is a crime, and survivors who want to report it have the right to. But it's not a requirement, and it shouldn't be, we don't want it to be a barrier to someone from seeking medical treatment after an instance of harm. You can absolutely get the exam without making a formal report. And the results of the exam are also stored. So a survivor can choose to report later once they've been able to process their emotions and weigh their options. So if someone does want to report, right, what should they know? To begin, a person can initiate the process by calling 911. They can walk into a police station, or they can notify a provider at a hospital or a clinic like PSARC that they would like to make a report to the police. In many cases, ideally, you will talk to an officer that's trained to interact with survivors of sexual trauma, and they'll be able to go over what happened and get some information. For the report, during that conversation, they're going to ask questions to get a description of the assaults, the who, what, where, when. They'll also want to get info about any evidence of force that was used, and the evidence of the lack of consent involved. And that can look a variety of different ways depending on the specific circumstances. But they want to know what happened so they can, build a case for that survivor. They'll also want to know about any potential signs that the act was premeditated. And also, they want to hear from the survivor about how this has impacted them, any feelings of fear, any trauma response, just any general impact that has been felt by the person after that experience. It's also important to keep a few minds, especially if you haven't had any interactions with the police, which many of us might not have gone through. It's important to anticipate that the process is going to take some time. The initial report can take a few hours, and then, depending on the exact circumstances, there may be additional follow-up conversations. An office might also ask an officer might ask the same question in different ways. It's important to remind ourselves that this doesn't necessarily show an indicator that they don't believe what we're saying, but it is a mechanism for them to get as many hard details as they can, so they can build a good case. And a lot of times these officers will understand that sometimes in the wake of a traumatic event, more details will come to you later, and you can always follow up with them to, clarify different parts of the experience that might have been a little cloudy right after the instance of harm. It's also important to acknowledge that the questions asked are going to be uncomfortable. It's okay to ask for a break, a glass of water, or anything else that can help us feel as comfortable as possible. And we'll get into that a little bit more on our next slide, where we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual advocacy piece of everything. So we've talked a lot about these systems of care after harm and systems of support, but how do we advocate for ourselves within these systems? The biggest thing to remember is that what happens after the experience of sexual assault or any other form of harm is the person's decision. It's your decision if that applies to you. There's no right way to navigate, and not everyone will want or need the same kinds of supports or the same kinds of, justice. Relatedly, within the choices we make, we can voice our needs. So during an exam or when making a report to the police, you are within your right to ask questions, take a break or stop. During a SANE exam, for instance, you can pause the examiner and even decline some parts of the test if you don't feel comfortable. You can escalate concerns. If you feel like the officer isn't listening to what you're saying, you can ask to speak to a supervisor instead. During an exam or police interview, you can also have someone in the room with you if that will, if you're talking about identifying what might help us, right? Maybe we know that that will help us feel safer and more comfortable if there's someone familiar in the room with us, or what feels like an advocate in the room with us. Which leads us into our next point, right? You're not alone. Speaking up for our needs, even in everyday situations, can feel scary and intimidating. Sometimes advocating for ourselves means asking someone to help advocate for us and stay with us during the process. An advocate can join you during exam. If you're at PSARC, war advocates are stationed and available at any time to join you and help guide you through the process. What are often called victim advocates are also available to join survivors for police interviews and to help them in navigating the next steps of pursuing legal action if they choose to. These advocates can help speak up for what we need if our voice isn't being heard, or even if we don't feel like we have the capacity to really use our voice at all, which is understandable after a stressful and traumatic event. They're there to say what we need and help us get what we need out of either of these situations.
All right, so thinking about, what we've talked about so far, whether someone wants to report or not, whether, they want someone with them or not, how can someone make themselves feel safe in a time when they might feel like they don't have control over things or might feel really, really unsafe? So we want to just provide some tips for maybe creating a safety plan for support. It is something that you might feel like you do have control over, just like writing some things out. And that in and of itself might feel good to just take some time to yourself to think through things, to think through what might make you feel safe. And we have a safety plan on the screen here. We also have physical copies of this in the office if you'd like to maybe stop by our office and grab a copy of something like this. But just thinking through the steps here, right? So maybe thinking about warning signs that a crisis might be developing, internal coping strategies that can take your mind off problems, and making sure they're coping strategies that are also, helpful to your well-being. So maybe things like taking a walk or something, or spending time with your loved ones, spending time with friends, thinking through things that make you feel good and safe, thinking back to that feelings wheel, like maybe when you're reading in a park or something, that's when you know you feel really good. So you can maybe mark that on this safety plan as well. Who or what are three people or places that can provide distraction? So having that information right at your fingertips could be really helpful if you're in a really heightened state and just need something like convenient. You want to talk to, this person. Okay, here's the information right here. It's easy to ask for. Same with who can you ask for help. So maybe having, war or PSARC, someone from there down on this list here, maybe a trusted friend or someone who you can always reach out to. And then, yeah, professionals or agencies you can contact. So having those local numbers, having those 24/7 hotline numbers is so important just to have on hand. Again, because you never know how you'll be able to maybe think through a situation once you're in it. So having these things right at your fingertips is a really great way to kind of take control and feel safe. Um, Calling or texting 988 is always really great for any kind of like mental health support in general. So just having that on hand is always great too. And then, a plan to make your environment safer. So in the Wellness Resource Center, we talk a lot about like holistic well-being and different dimensions of wellness, and environmental wellness is included in that. That can be spending time in nature and decompressing, but it could also be maybe like, I know, having maybe a heated blanket and a cup of tea and some plants around you just makes your environment feel safe. So if you might be having some anxiety, some trauma happening, knowing you have that safe space is really, really helpful to have. So again, this is just a nice little self-reflection activity. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. You don't have to fill in every single box here. You don't even have to use this exact safety plan, but this is just a guideline to kind of get you started thinking about these things should you ever need it, or if a friend needs it, just having something like this on hand. And we always like to think about too, after someone might have experienced harm, reconnecting to the body can feel really difficult. After being maybe violated, after maybe feeling vulnerable, it can feel really challenging to then take ownership back over someone's body, feel like it's yours again, feel comfortable, and feel kind of that self-love again. So just want to acknowledge that first of all. It's definitely not a linear journey of healing. Give yourself grace when you're experiencing these things, give your body grace, and know that these things might take time. But when you're ready, some of these tips here might help you start to reconnect with your physical body, start to kind of, decompress and know that your body is capable of feeling good again. It just might take some time and some intentionality. So just some tips here, noticing how your lower body feels connected to the surface below it. So this is kind of like the start of a body scan, and you can even think through it now as you're listening. Like if you're sitting in a chair, how do your feet feel on the ground? It feels good to be supported, right? We have these physical reminders of support. We have all these community organizations and all of maybe our friends and family there to support us. But here now, that ground is supporting you. The chair you're sitting on is physically supporting you. So let that kind of be a representation of grounding, of support in the space that you're physically in. Maybe if you're in a bed, like how does that let your body physically let go? You don't have to, tense up. You don't have to hold yourself up at all. Just acknowledging that feeling and being in it in that moment. And then doing a nice little body scan. So once you're comfortable in the space, whether you're sitting down or laying in a bed or something like that, just start. You can either start from head to toe or other way around, but start, at your head. Like, how does it feel to be in the space around me? How do like my ears feel? What's any sensation here? Maybe unclenching the jaw or doing some neck circles, and just kind of going down through the body and noticing if there are any areas of tightness. Where do you maybe need to send extra love to? I know sometimes like the chest, the heart space can get really tense, especially after a moment of harm. So paying special care to these areas and also leading with mindfulness. There's no need to be judgmental of yourself for feeling tight or feeling anxious in certain areas. It really is just an exercise in recognizing feelings, working through those feelings, and again, treating ourselves with the most compassion and care we can at any given time. So working through now some different resources, we again just wanted to kind of give you an overview today of how to work through a sexual assault nurse exam and also just in general how to take care of yourself in your interpersonal relationships with your sexual health, how to, move about the world in a way that will hopefully make you feel safe. So all of these resources are available to you to support you. Student Health is great for any kind of like preventive care. They have STI testing, they have different birth control options. Philadelphia Fight does a ton of different services, lots of sexual health, and they also have a lot of great gender affirming care services. Ideal is the diversity office on campus. So they have some really great like community building events and things like that to reconnect with the people around you. Planned Parenthood is a great online resource for generally learning about different sexual health topics, but then they also have physical locations around the Philadelphia area that people are able to access. Institute on Disabilities has some really great healthy sexuality resources, especially with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the Department of Health actually has some really great resources when it comes to free STI testing. If you visit, phila.gov, but then also find their like Philly Keep On Loving section, they have condoms you can order, HIV test kits you can order, all sorts of really great free resources.
So then moving to some more resources, but from that violence prevention standpoint, we have Tittleman Counseling, which you may be familiar with as a Temple student, but if you're not, they do provide counseling services to all of our students here at Temple. They're accessible through their website, and they also do have what's called SACE, which is dedicated to sexual assault survivors. So they have that special attention to some of the emotions someone might feel if they've gone through that, and they've got some really great folks there to help them work through those things. We also have our Title IX office. Title IX handles any reports from Temple students of gender-based violence. So that includes sexual assault, but also other dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking issues as well. So if someone does want to make a report to Temple University, they can contact the Title IX office, and they can help them, kind of work through the steps that will follow there. I'm also shouting out Student Health Services here. I know they were on the last slide too, but Student Health Services is great. They are there to support students, and if you're looking for things like STI testing or emergency contraceptives after an experience of harm, they're there to help you get those things. And then on our community resource side, we have WAR, which we mentioned earlier, the Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence. They have great educational resources, but also they do offer some counseling, individual therapy, group therapy, and they're there to also, as we were saying, support people during their SANE exams if they choose to get one. And they do have a 24-hour crisis hotline. So someone who might be in a crisis after an experience of harm can get in contact with them and speak with an advocate. And then finally, we mentioned them before too, PSARC, Philadelphia Sexual Assault Response Center. They are there to help with those medical needs after an instance of harm, to perform a SANE exam, and then also to, kind of guide through next steps if someone does want to take the additional step of reporting to law enforcement. They have a normal line and then also an emergency line if folks are, again, in crisis and it's, odd hours, they are there. They're open all the time, so they can speak with you there. And just as a little note, if you see a nice little asterisk or star next to one of the names, that does indicate a confidential resource. So you can go there and speak about what happened, and they aren't required to, report to the university or report to the police. And you can feel comfortable in kind of sharing what you need to share.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for viewing this. We're available again in our office in the Student Center, right above the food court, room 201. If you have any questions about things we talked about, we also have a lot of great like physical pamphlet resources in our office, connecting you with some of the orgs that we plugged, but also just general education around some of these topics. So please feel free to stop by if you have any questions. Yeah, awesome. And I'll also note too, feel free to follow us at BeWellTU. If you scan this QR code, this will just take you to all the different ways to stay in touch with us. Thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you be well.